I have a video on the 9 weak words that you absolutely should delete from your book. It's a great video. If you haven't seen it yet, you should totally watch it. But this video is going to be about, what words you actually should use in your book. These are the 9 power words, or really they're more like the categories or types of words that will level up your book. Let's start right away with number 1. Rich words. So Jane Cleland, in her book Mastering Plot Twists, she mentions, just sort of like offhandedly in a paragraph, about what she considers to be rich words. Now, what does she mean by rich words? Rich words are just fun words that are not everyday language. They have weight, they make your book feel special, and they just liven up your language. And the example she gives is the word pizzazz. If you can work the word pizzazz into your novel in some way, whether in dialogue or actually the narrator saying it, that's going to make your book feel alive. Now, what does she not mean by rich words? I would guess that she doesn't mean words you have to look up in a dictionary. Dictionary words might make you look smart, but it doesn't make it easier to read or more pleasurable to read. Really, what I want you to think about is the ratio you have in your book between everyday language, just common everyday words, and sort of rich language that is specialized in some way. I will say that a very normal everyday word might become a rich word depending on the context. Let's look at Mary Oliver in her poem Wild Geese. She has the word pebbles. Okay, pebbles is a really normal word. You wouldn't say that's a special word in any way. But now you put it in a phrase of clear pebbles of rain, and now we're looking at rain as if it is a pebble. It elevates the language. Or look at a word like feral. Okay, feral, like you think a wild animal in some way. But what if you say the feral weather? What if you're talking about feral music or a feral joy? Okay, now you've taken that word, which is, so-so, but you elevated it by combining it in an unusual way with other language. That's rich language, and if you can just get a little bit of that inside your book, it makes it more pleasurable for the reader to encounter something in a new context. And if you really want to improve your writing on a sentence-by-sentence level, I would humbly suggest to take my course, How to Write a Splendid Sentence, where I really go through and give tons of examples and give lots of exercises that will help you train yourself to write better sentences. It's also my second best-selling course and has a ton of reviews. People love it, so I'll put the link below so you can check it out. A second powerful way to use language in your book is to make sure that your language is character appropriate. Does your character sound like everybody else out there? Are they using language in a very generic, nondescript way? If they are, then it's your job to tweak their language in a way that helps set them apart from the crowd. You might want to choose a special word that they repeat often. You might want to choose a special phrase. But for a character who sounds entirely like himself, let's check out Kirk Lazarus in Tropic Thunder. And he is talking about how to ask a woman on a date. He starts with nah, then he repeats 3 cliches. Then he doesn't say to ask her on a date, but he says to tell her that you're going on a date with her. Plus, he uses some ungrammatical language like you and me's, and then some clipped language like going. But the way he uses language is certainly appropriate for his character. That's who he's trying to play. The third category of power words that you should absolutely use in your book are precise words. Sometimes you might use a word like house, but really the more appropriate term might be shack or it might be mansion. Sometimes you use a word like red, but really a more precise term might be crimson. Sometimes you use a word like tree, but a better term might be cottonwood. Or what if you use the term like gun, but really the more appropriate term might be rifle or pistol or shotgun or blunderbuss. Now, little warning here, can you go too far in the area of precision of language? Yes, you can. There's all sorts of reasons why sometimes you need to be a little less precise, either because that's how the character would see it, or perhaps it's just not the right word for the situation. For instance, what if a character says like, watch out, over there's a guy with an AR-15 with a 16-inch barrel and a flash suppressor. No, what they would say is, there's a dude with a gun. So I would say that 90% of the time, your job is trying to go from less specific words to more specific and more precise language. But every once in a while, sometimes the imprecise word is exactly the right word. The fourth strategy when trying to make sure that your novel is as powerful as possible on the language level is double down on lifeblood words. So as a very general principle of good writing, I think you should focus on lifeblood words, which I would say would be nouns and verbs, and not get caught up too much with adjectives and adverbs and all the smaller elements of language. What is the lifeblood of writing? nouns and verbs. And so you have to go back to that when you're trying to improve your language. Now, I'm not saying anything crazy like you should only write nouns and verbs and never use prepositions or adverbs or adjectives. No. That's insanity, right? Obviously, those other parts of language are great. What I'm saying is you want to make sure your nouns and your verbs are doing the heavy lifting of your sentences, that they're really carrying the weight of your sentences. A book I've been reading recently is Leif Enger's I Cheerfully Refuse. And this is a sentence I particularly liked. The minute these comets appear in the heavens, all kinds of calamities start chugging away on Earth. So let's just look at the sentence and break it down into its parts. There are 6 nouns: minute, common, heavens, kinds, calamities, and Earth. And there are 3 verbs: appear, start, and chugging. Now, are there a couple of prepositional phrases? Yes, absolutely there are. And once again, there's nothing wrong with that. But really, the bulk of this sentence is chugging along using its nouns and its strong verbs. So if you ever want to do a diagnosis on a sentence of yours, just break it down and figure out what the pieces are. What sort of pieces belong in this sentence? And if you have 10 prepositional phrases, or if you have like 5 adverbs and 5 adjectives, you might want to ask yourself, is that really what will make the best sentence in this situation? Am I using the right materials or the right scaffolding to build a strong sentence? Let's move on to the next category of power words, which you absolutely need to be using, and it is number 5, atmosphere words. So a lot of the goal when you're writing a book is to create a certain kind of mood on the page, because what a mood does is it helps the reader to feel something. It gets them into the mood of your book. And once you have them in that certain mood, then you can do anything you want in terms of making them sympathize with the characters or making them engage with the plot. But the first step is to get them in that mood. But here's the trouble. You can't get them in a mood by saying like, oh, this was a very happy place, or by saying, oh, like this was a very scary place. No, instead you have to use language in a lot more of a suggestive way. Let's look at Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. Classic, absolute classic. A lot of you have probably read it. Take a second and read this first paragraph and tell me, what is the mood created by the language that he uses? What do you feel after reading this? I can guarantee what you do not feel. You do not feel peppy. You do not feel happy. You do not feel optimistic. And there's not a single word that I can point to and be like, oh, this is the word, this is the power word that really makes it worth it. No, it's a whole constellation of language that he uses. And when all that language combines in a certain way, it makes you embrace this sort of dark and somber mood. It's words like dull, dark, and soundless. It's words like oppressively and dreary. It's words like shades and evening. And it's words like melancholy. Now, obviously, he's using a lot of adjectives to create this mood, which sort of contradicts what I was saying in the previous point. I don't know if you've noticed that. But I do think there's a way to do this where you don't have to do this using adjectives and adverbs. You can do this in a lot of different ways, even by the nouns and the verbs that you choose as well. So there's a lot of ways to create a mood. You just have to figure out what sort of atmospheric words that can I use to create the mood that I want my readers to be in. Let's move on to the 6th category of power words, which is active verbs. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick test right now to determine what level of verb writing you are at. Let's say a robber comes into a store and a woman is in front of the counter, and then in a couple of seconds she ends up behind the counter. I'm deliberately saying it that way not to give you any sort of verb. But I'm asking, what would be the verb that you would use when that woman shifts from her position in front of the counter to behind the counter? What verb would you use? And as you're thinking about that, I am going to lay out the 3 levels of verbs that you would use in a situation like this, but obviously applies to pretty much any verb that you want to use. The 3 levels start with the lowest level, which is number 1, a generic verb. So a generic verb in this situation would be she went behind the counter, or she goes behind the counter. That gives absolutely zero info, right? We can't visualize anything. It is the most lackluster verb you could possibly use. Another way to say it would be even she moved behind the counter. Terrible verb. What do you learn by the verb moved? I mean, it's a placeholder, but it doesn't give the reader any joy. It doesn't give them any insight. It's a pretty awful word to use. Sorry if you picked move. Sorry if you picked move. I hope you didn't pick moved. Okay, so let's move on to level 2. This would be more of an everyday verb. Something like she hid behind the counter. Okay, well, hid is not terrible. It's a pretty functional word, and I think The benefit of it is it's slightly emotional. Like hiding implies there is something to hide from. So there's, it's connotating the element of danger that's going on in this scene. So, okay, is it the best verb you could use? Absolutely not, right? I mean, it's sort of really middle brow. But now let's graduate to the third level. What would be a super verb that you could use in this situation? I'll suggest two. One would be she darted behind the counter. Why is darted a good verb? One is because it's a verb that's rooted in a very specific noun, the act of darts, right? So you can see a dart moving and you're equivocating that to the way that she would move behind the counter. A second excellent verb to use would be she scuttled behind the counter. So scuttled is a verb, I think, that relies a little bit on the way that a crab would move. So you can literally see that little scuttle movement as she scampers or scuttles behind that countertop. You visually get a scene of it in a way that with a word like hid, you can't really see it. So always be interrogating the verbs in your novel. How many of your verbs are generic verbs? How many of your verbs are just like passable everyday verbs? And then how many of your verbs are like super verbs? I think I need a t-shirt that just says super verb. No, I don't. That would be ridiculous. But I might make one. And by the way, if you want a book that helps you with your verbs, I would suggest checking out Vex, Hex, Smash, Smooch. Yes, it's a verb-centric title, and it is by Constance Hale. By the time you finish that book, you will have verbs on the brain, and you will be constantly thinking about your verbs, and it's impossible for you not to become a better verb writer through reading a book like that. You think you don't need it, but you kind of do. Now it's time for the next step, which is number 7, sideways emotion words. So the right way to get the reader to feel emotion is not through using the emotional words that you want them to feel. It's not by saying like happy and they'll feel happier. It's not by saying sad so they'll feel sad. You will know this if you watched my video on the Emotional Craft of Fiction book, which is titled Why 90% of Fiction Writers Fail to Connect with Readers. So your goal when trying to create emotions in readers is not just to shove that emotion into the text. That doesn't work. So what words should you say instead? Well, you need to use these sideways words, words that will create an emotional reaction in the reader without you being like, feel this emotion, now, do it. And for an example of this, let's look at Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. She has a moment, and I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but someone gets shot in the book. So how do the characters deal with this tragedy? Well, it's not by repeating the word sad a lot or by showing people crying. It's done in a lot more subtle way. It uses the language of people sitting on the floor, multiple people sitting on the floor. They're sitting on the floor in a hospital, right? People just keep on sitting on the floor. And then what are they doing? They're folding paper cranes because there's a Japanese tradition where if you fold 1,000 paper cranes, it's supposed to help the person get better. And what I love about this manner of dealing with tragedy is that it combines a sense of grief with a sense of hope. You feel grief when you just see people sitting on the floor, but you also feel hope because they are sitting on the floor to fold these paper cranes. They hope this person gets better. It's the perfect picture of grief and hope, but without saying the words grief or hope. And you can tell this is like definitely more of an advanced technique. You're trying to use language that alludes to the emotions rather than says the emotions themselves. Along that same line of advanced techniques, let's get to category number 8 of power words. Language with double meanings. What we're talking about here are basically subtext words. So when you use a word in your book that you don't only want it to mean the literal meaning, you also want it to mean sort of an underground or basement meaning as well that the astute reader will be able to pick up on. And I will say in general that what subtext does is it helps your book from becoming too one-dimensional and surfacey and just gives it a little bit of complexity. So let's look at a book like Wendell Berry's Hannah Coulter. Here we have a young woman who's just gotten engaged and she runs to the person who's renting her a room, which happens to be her fiance's aunt. And she calls her the formal name that she's always called her. She says, Miss Aura. And then the person who's renting her a room smiles and corrects her and just says one word, Auntie. Now, on the surface, what is she saying? She's saying, well, you know, you're engaged, so now this is the new name for me. Like, you can call me Aunt now. But on a deeper level, on a subtextual level, what is she really saying with that single word? She's saying, I love you. She's saying, welcome to the family. She's saying, congratulations, I'm so happy for you. Finally, let's look at the very last category of power words. These are words you've probably been expecting for the whole video, and so I don't want to disappoint you. It is number 9, sensory words. So take a moment and I want you to calculate on any sample page of your writing, what percentage of that page, what percentage of it activates your reader's five senses. If you don't want to do a whole page, that's fine. Just take a paragraph of your writing and just sort of analyze it and be like, okay, did I activate sight in any way? Did I activate sound? Did I activate their sense of taste? Someone who's done this really well would be Ernest Hemingway in the first paragraph of A Farewell to Arms. Check out this paragraph. I want you to read it and to find a place where he is not painting a picture for you, where he is not activating the senses of the reader. Look at the colors alone in this paragraph. We have white boulders, we have clear water, we have deeper blue water, we have brown dust, we have a white road. I mean, this might as well be a painting that's hanging in the Louvre. It's just that precise and that evocative of the scene. And if you find that you have a long passage or maybe even a full chapter without a lot of sensory details, the reader's going to start to drift away from the world of your book, and they're not even going to be able to name why they have become less interested in reading you. They're just going to be like, I don't know, I just sort of lost interest. Well, they lost interest because you're not sucking them into your world with these powerful sensory words. Sensory words are like tractor beams that are hooking your reader's eyes to your novel, and it makes them not want to stop. It makes them not want to go to sleep. And the last thing I'll say about that is make sure that you're not over-relying on sight for your sensory words. A lot of writers I edit do this, is that 95% of their senses are just visual, which, you know, I get it. Like, we're visual creatures, that's wonderful. But make sure to be evocative with smells and with tastes and with sounds as well. Don't forget the other senses. Okay, I hope all those power words help you write stronger sentences. If you want a little bit more instruction, please check out my sentence course, How to Write a Splendid Sentence. I'll put that link in the description. And I hope your writing is fantastic today. Have an awesome writing day.